The concept for EPARTRADE is basically, in my opinion, there's a big hole in the internet. So the internet started many years ago, but there's never been an online business community for racers on the World Wide Web. The need for EPARTRADE is actually quite obvious. Basically, people in the business of auto racing need a place online to hang out and get their problems solved.
It's extremely simple for a buyer or for a supplier to interact on the platform. The first thing you need to do is sign in, which is free. And the second thing is, when you see a product that you're interested in, all you need to do is click on request more information. If it's a company, you click on request more information, and then from there, it is forwarded directly to the buyer or to the supplier.
You can go to EPARTRADE.com, you become part of a community of businesses in racing, and it makes sourcing products much easier than just on the internet or using Google.
At EPARTRADE, there is no e-commerce. It's literally a connection just like at a trade show. So now, any time of the year, a buyer could reach out to a supplier through an email.
More than that, it's a place to go just to keep current every day. So it's a good place to start your workday in your racing business or in your offices of your professional race team. And you know you're current when it comes to new technology, industry news, technical papers, technical videos, all of that and more. We're not looking for a million hits per day. All we want is people who are really the volume buyers of racing products in the racing industry to be part of the little world of EPARTRADE. We have racing businesses participating from around the world. So you get suppliers from around the world, you get buyers from around the world.
EPARTRADE really eliminates having to travel, closing down your shop. Now you have a place to showcase globally your racing product and technology.
Good morning from California, and welcome to Race Industry Now, the technical and business webinar series from EPARTRADE, presented to you by ARP and Performance Plus Global Logistics. I am Francis Savignan, the founder and CEO of EPARTRADE, the global platform for the performance and racing industry. This is episode 237, and we're going to be talking with Driven Racing Oil and LN Engineering with Kyle and Charles. So with me this morning are Judy Kim, the co-founder of EPARTRADE, and our terrific host, Mr. Jeff Hammond. Judy, good morning.
Good morning, Francis. And I just got back from North Carolina, spending a week back there, and had I was able to join Lynn St. James and Cindy Sesson and in Motorsports. And it was a great 2-day event there at the Speedway. And Jeff Hammond was there. He saw how packed it was out there. Then I was also able to get out and confirm 5 industry leaders for our Race Industry Week that's coming up. So it was a great week and a great event presented by those two. So Jeff?
Well, glad to have you back. Hope you're getting rested up. And Francis, I'm really excited about today and the idea of learning about aluminum engines and what the differences are and some of the challenges in lubricating those components, because so many people in all different forms of racing are now migrating in that direction. So I'm really interested to see how this is going to play out and then get a chance to talk to Kyle on that.
Excellent. I see Charles, and here they are. Perfect.
Here
So
they are.
good morning, guys.
Good morning, Francis.
Good to see you both.
Hi, Judy.
Then Jeff, we'll let you take over.
All right, sounds good. Good morning, gentlemen. Hope you're doing well.
Yep. How are you doing this morning, Jeff?
I'm doing quite well. I'll just tell you real quick. I'm actually at a charity event in North Wilkesboro. Believe that, home now of the All-Star event in 2023. And there's a charity event here that Benny Parsons started many years ago to help raise money for needy families and children during the holiday. And I've been supporting that along with his wife, Terry Parsons, for many years now. And we're up here today trying to raise some funds. And I didn't want to miss my opportunity to talk to you guys. So I'm actually doing it from the clubhouse.
Good to see North Wilkesboro back on the schedule, isn't it?
And it really is. It really is. It's very exciting. And the whole county and all the community around here, surrounding communities, they're stoked about it. They really are. A lot of stuff's getting changed, and a little bit like your product. I mean, it's one of those things right now. Oil's been around a long time. Wilkesboro's been around a long time, but every now and then you need something new. You got to get it kind of lubricated up a little different way. So yeah, it's a good time for you. I think, the industry as a whole. And like I say, I'm real excited to learn something about your product, which I've known about it, but I hadn't had a chance to really delve off into all the changes that have occurred within your product.
Well, Jeff, as you know, we started off as the original Joe Gibbs racing oil, and with Lake Speed Jr. At the helm, and of course, I think Lake was the first one to do one of these EPARTRADE presentations. So, matter of fact, just between you and I and Charles, I keep expecting Lake to walk in here at some point in time and just sit down. So if that happens, don't be surprised, because if you know Lake,
time out. Yeah. From Lake Speed Jr. to all panelists. Hi guys. He is watching already. You can't go anywhere. You can't run. You can't hide. Lake Speed is watching you wherever you go.
Yeah. Wish you were here, Lake.
Yeah. Be careful. He may log in.
I just hope he doesn't ask a question unless it's of Charles. I hope he doesn't ask me a question. So, but I think we'll be all right. We got it covered.
No, I think everything's going to be fine, and I'm excited, like I say, to hear what Charles and is going to bring us, because I noticed I got a few questions here, and he's going to handle most of them, Kyle. But like I say, really appreciate you guys being a part of motorsports. I mean, and again, high performance engineering, because God knows there's not an engine out there, there's not a product out there that doesn't need to be lubricated.
That's so true. So, and you know the history, right? With, we're almost, 22, 23 years into the development of some of this stuff, and going back to Lake's work with Joe Gibbs, and then, of course, Comp Cams, Scooter Brothers, Ron Coleman were, owners of Comp Cams at the time. So they became the development partner, if you will. And then after a few years of success, and I think at the time, Lake defined success as, look, if I'm working for Joe Gibbs and I can sell oil to the other NASCAR teams, right?
Yep.
That's a huge success. But NASCAR being as dog eat dog as it is, that's not going to happen forever. So, but to Lake's credit, working with Scooter Brothers, Ron Coleman, Comp Cams, Mark Cronquist as, lead engine builder there, started building quite a product portfolio. And that's when Scooter and Ron reached out to JD and Joe and said, hey, there's a business here beyond NASCAR, beyond the motocross team. And that's kind of our strength, if you will. So Scooter and Ron took it, and Joe Gibbs Racing Oil eventually became Driven Racing Oil, and somewhere in that mix, Charles and Jake Raby and a handful of other people.
I think we all kind of landed, and we were all doing kind of our own development and testing work all around the same time. I read Lake's papers that were published in the SAE on development of oil with Joe Gibbs Racing, and at that time I bought. I want to know why engines were failing from camshaft and lifter failures. So I bought every white paper that was published on motor oil development, going all the way back to the first one, Lubrizol and ZDDP, and went my way forward and read every single one. I still have every single paper. And some people say that there is no new knowledge, if stuff gets forgotten and you have to you have to find it again. And that's what happened, is read all these papers and you go, good God, this problem has happened before. All the information's there, and it's why. And I found one was a one-liner in the API development paper, basically that said that the backwards compatibility of motor oils no longer exists. And I'm like, there you go. That's why engines are failing. People are using modern motor oils in their old engines, and the oil hasn't been tested and it's not intended to be backwards compatible. So that's why we needed a product like Driven for our engines.
So what you're telling me is that even though we got smarter and we built better or more modern engines, we forgot the simple basics. Is that what you're saying?
Yep. The OEMs, what the OEMs were demanding, like everyone's pushing for what 0W5, 0W10. That's right now the focus is on fuel economy. And if you look at the requirements for these modern oils, they're in their test sequence, they allow something like 400 part per million of iron in the test sequence. no one would. I'm pretty much anyone you ask, that 400 part per million is a ludicrous number when we're used to seeing in our Porsche engines in a normal service interval. If you have more than 10 part per million of iron, you go, what's going on? There's something happening. And they're allowing in a test sequence 400 is acceptable. Well, they're allowing for higher wear to at the benefit of having greater fuel economy. And as long as the engines pass the warranty period, that ultimately that's what the OEMs want. They want a product that's going to minimize their fines they have to pay for CAFE requirements and minimize their expenses on warranty repairs is what it boils down to with modern lubricants. And we don't really care in the aftermarket in dealing with our performance engines or our classic engines. We don't care about fuel economy. We don't care about long drain intervals. We want whatever oil is going to give us the best wear protection, period.
Yeah. Well, with that, how about try to explain and educate me when when I'm getting ready to say this, make sure I read the question and put it out there the right way. What makes an all aluminum engine different from engines with iron sleeves or a cast iron block engine? What do you run into? What do you run into?
Yeah, so what I call a modern aluminum engine. I'll define this. You have plenty of aluminum engines out there with steel sleeves in them. I'm not calling that a modern aluminum engine. What I'm calling is something that's a linerless engine, like an alusil engine block, where you don't have a steel wear surface. You have a aluminum wear surface. So in the case of alusil or locasil, that you have silicon particles that are exposed through a chemical or a mechanical process, and they remove the aluminum from around the silicon particles, and that allows engine oil to surround those silicon particles, and that oil film is what the piston and the rings ride on, and that's coupled with, I have a little visual I can show everybody at home. So this is a factory Porsche piston. I'll get that as close as you can. You can see this is actually from an engine that failed, but you can see on the piston skirt, there's a clear wear pad put on the piston. And what is done with an all aluminum engine, they put an ironclad coating on the piston because you can't have aluminum riding on aluminum. So they'll put an ironclad coating, or they'll put some sort of polymer coating on the piston just so that you can separate aluminum from aluminum and you don't have galling. But the benefit of having an all aluminum engine and why this is all the OEMs are pushing to all aluminum is that you can make the engine smaller than an engine that has iron sleeves in it. They can put the cylinders closer to each other, or vice versa. They can actually put a larger bore in an engine with the same footprint. So they can either make the engine smaller and lighter, or they can make a bigger engine in the same footprint. So they can get the same amount of power out of a 6-cylinder that they're getting out of an 8-cylinder, or the same amount of power out of a 4-cylinder that they got originally out of a 6-cylinder. So it's all about downsizing. Another benefit of an aluminum engine, they can have smaller cooling systems, smaller radiators, less coolant volume, smaller water jackets. With an iron block or an aluminum block with iron sleeves, you have to have a larger cooling system. So a smaller engine is just more efficient. But obviously there are requirements from an aluminum engine that are different than an engine with iron sleeves or an iron block.
Now, based off of what you're seeing and hearing from the OEMs and everything, what do you is there anybody that's having more problems than normal when it comes to something like this?
Yeah, I mean, if you were to Google bore scoring, that's a topic. A lot of people think that it's piston seizing, and that's a different issue entirely. The piston's not seizing. So again, this example of this piston I have here, you can see the skirt is clearly worn. That piston did not seize in the bore. This probably had 10, 15 thousandths of piston to wall clearance by the time the engine came apart. And you can see the skirt coating's mostly intact on the other side. But what we run into is because of a breakdown of the lubrication and also the coating on the pistons, also coupled with issues with fuel systems, with ethanol fuels, leading to injectors going bad, and we get poor fuel spray or leaky injectors, and we get cylinder wash down, and then eventually you get fuel dilution really bad, and you can't support the film strength that's required to maintain that cylinder piston system. So we see an eventual degradation of that system, and it's not one single thing that causes the failure, but oil is the number one thing that you can do as a preventative maintenance item, using the right oil in that engine to minimize the chance of having a problem like that.
And I think that's a critical part in the conversation, because Charles and Lake have been working on this problem for years, this bore scoring problem. I was lucky enough on Monday, got a call from an NHRA stock eliminator racer, runs a Ford Coyote. Completely different application, but through his Google search, he came upon LN Engineering just because they've been doing it for so long. And I gotta, while I'm thinking of it, if you have any interest in this topic, lubrication, bore scoring, stuff like that, go to the LN site. It is absolutely fantastic. I mean, it is a engineer's dream, if you will, whether it's backyard engineer or degreed engineer. There's so much information on their website. You got to go there. But in this Coyote application, one thing that's different than what Charles experiences is because it's an NHRA car, they're running extremely low coolant and oil temps. They may be hitting the starting line at 90 degrees Fahrenheit and the finish line at 120 degrees Fahrenheit. Well, Charles will tell you they don't want to see anything more than 3,000 RPM until the engine's up to operating temperature.
Yeah, we have directives that we give to customers, and we have on our website, that you don't want to start up a motor and let it idle. That's the worst thing you can do. You need to start it and start driving, but you can't go wide open. You have to run the engine maybe 3,000 RPM, 3,500 max, until the oil gets up to, say, 150, 160 degrees, and the coolant's the temperature. We see a lot of these all aluminum engines in colder weather climates that are driven year round. We see more failure rates. We see the engines fail more often. So we know that cold weather is a contributing factor. And also the engines are on cold start with enrichment longer in cold weather. So it's a double whammy. And then if you add in on top of that, that the OE recommended oils for these engines is not suitable for the application. So you have an oil that's not optimal and operating conditions that aren't optimal, and it all leads to these problems.
Well, guys, we've already got some questions coming in, so I want to make sure we don't get too very far behind on those. This one comes from Russ Panton, and he wants to know, as far as bearing clearances and oil, how tight is too tight, and what is the minimum oil film thickness required?
Let you answer that, kind of within the Porsche world, if you will.
Yeah,
and if
so
I can add something
people ask about bearing clearances and viscosities, and I always direct everyone to Driven's website, because they have a table that shows bearing clearances and viscosities and stuff like that. That's a great table you can find anywhere else. But as far as piston to cylinder, that's what I would say is most applicable to this question, that the OEMs want to run really, really tight clearances. And on the most modern horizontally opposed Porsche engines, we bought brand new ones to take apart so we can measure, and they're running in an all aluminum block with a forged piston, 7/10 of 1,000 clearance. So there's not a whole lot of room for, if there's a lubrication problem going on, or the engine's not to temperature, or if you get on it too soon, that explains why we see those problems. And we tend to open up the clearances when we do the engines. We usually will add anywhere between half a thou or a thou extra clearance with a forged piston over what the OE was running. And it's all with the components. It has what the engine is, how it's designed, what piston you're using, what piston alloy is being used. There's lots of questions. So it's real hard to give a definitive answer to that. And certain engines require piston pin offsets. Some you can get away with not doing it. Like the first Cayenne V8 engine that we did, we hadn't done piston pin offsets in all the horizontally opposed engines. So like, well, why do we need offsets in a V8 engine? And I kid you not, it sounded like a diesel engine. It was clacking it without the piston offsets, and we had to pull it back apart and put offsets in the pistons. It had to have the offset. And it was the same thing with the direct injected MA1 engine, the horizontally opposed 6. The first one we did, we didn't put any offsets in it, and it was noisy on top of the injector pump. Whew, that was one noisy engine. So we've learned through trial and error what works best for every application. And it just takes time. The more engines you do, more engines you build, the more you tear down, the more you learn.
And I'm glad Charles mentioned trial and error, because I think that's kind of where we're at. If I go back to that Coyote stock eliminator example, if that's a Coyote in a road race car where he's already at 220 degrees operating temperature, and our chart that Charles referred to, it refers to main and rod bearing clearances. But what we're seeing in this stock eliminator application is the piston shape correctly? Is the ovality correct for the given coolant temperature of 70 to 90 to probably a max of 120 degrees? Well, what are the characteristics of that aluminum block, of that piston, and what's the optimum skirt clearance that we need in this completely different environment?
And the other thing that we see, and if you read, like Kolben Schmidt does a lot of the castings for the European manufacturers, and they have manuals on reconditioning, and and their manuals on the processes, how they cast the blocks, and they talk about inherent stresses that are built into the castings, and when you're machining them and honing them and boring and honing them, they talk about these stresses. And what we see with the MA1 engine, for example, from Porsche, they started using in 2009. With those really tight clearances, the 0.7 of 1,000 clearance, we see some of the blocks start moving after they've been heat cycled for, I would say, a few hundred heat cycles, 1,000 heat cycles, that around the mains, the bores start tightening up. So in those engines, we see bore scoring, but more often we actually see where the piston actually gets too tight at bottom dead center, and the piston starts seizing because the bores actually move and shrink. And because we found blocks that we've inspected, and we found that they have almost no clearance at the bottom, but they haven't failed yet.
Okay. Real quick, Kyle, you made mention of a website that everybody needs to go and check out.
It's lnengineering.com.
Yeah, hop on lnengineering.com. We have a little bit of everything for everyone, technical wise. I actually wrote a white paper on the topic of bore scoring and aluminum engines. Forewarned, is very technical, so whatever your whether that's a pot of coffee or some tequila or whiskey, well, whatever works for you,
Or Bud Light.
or Bud Light, yeah, so somewhere in the middle, whatever floats your boat. So definitely that's a read if you really want to know about this topic in depth, and it's not opinion. I spent over a year researching it, and I actually cite. So if you really want to know, you can go actually get or buy all the papers I cited, so that there's good information there.
And while you're at it, save drivenracingoil.com into your favorites as well. They play well together. So.
Okay. Well, speaking of Lake Speed Jr., he's not gone away yet, guys. He also added here, fuel dilution is an enemy of the oil. And the colder the engine runs, the harder it is for the fuel to vaporize.
Yeah, there's no question about that. And it's, and I don't know if Lake's question was triggered by the stock eliminator. He actually, I think, knows the racer I'm talking about, who happens to, his day-to-day job is EFI. So, so fuel curve in his situation is probably mastered, but certainly acknowledge that. And I think going back a few years ago, I was watching you and Lake on here, and that's one of the things we talked about. And back to your point on the Porsche application, it's the warm up, or that's what makes the warm up so critical, because nothing's at operating temperature. The oil's cold, right? And you've got fuel enrichment for cold start. And so you have all these different parameters that they really only lead to something bad.
Yeah, and a lot of, and with modern engines, a lot of people don't realize, especially with the direct injected engines, that if you get rid of EGR or something like that, one of the things they do, it's one of my friends, Tony Callis, talks about this, that fuel is cat food. And that is the catalytic converters, the way they get the catalytic converters to warm up and start working better is by dumping tons of fuel into the engine when it's cold. And again, this is all emissions driven. So he says fuel is cat food.
Yeah.
So at cold start, they want to have it rich. They want a lot of fuel going through there to get those catalytic converters up to temperature as quickly as possible.
So that kind of brings me to another question was, so the special lubrication requirements for a modern engine, especially those with direct injection phase,
Yep.
all of that correlates into what you're explaining right now, right?
Yes, exactly. So I don't think you can see it on the whiteboard behind us, but I put moly. With an aluminum engine bore like Alusil, Locasil, and there's other variants. Honda has their own version, Toyota has their own version, other manufacturers have their own version. But the one thing you have in common with all of them is that ZDDP doesn't function with aluminum. Normally you have heat and pressure when you have an iron part against an iron part. Heat and pressure activates a ZDDP and creates that wear film. Aluminum, you could put as much heat and pressure with ZDDP and aluminum. ZDP does not interact with aluminum. So really the only additive that's in the oil that actually can create a film on the aluminum is moly. Moly creates, when you apply temperature and pressure on an aluminum surface, moly will form what they call as glassy plates. So moly will make sheets. And what provides the wear protection is that when the part moves, it shears the moly sheet off. Then it'll form a new one. It shears. So it's a continual process of building up moly and taking moly away. So the moly in the oil, that's the one additive that we've seen through used oil analysis with these Porsche engines, that having a high moly content helps with reducing wear in these engines with the cylinders or the pistons.
Okay. And the moly, what happens when you take a modern engine and you add ethanol enriched fuels to it?
Yeah, so that's another one with, so we see it with a lot of the port injected Porsche engines that we deal with. We're seeing lots of engines where if we see an engine with a scored bore or two scored bores, that if we send the injectors out to get them tested, it's pretty much 100% guaranteed those two injectors will be bad and they'll leak. So what we're thinking is that the ethanol fuels are actually attacking the fuel system components. So replacing injectors, but before you, let's say you put a new injector in there, it's still old technology. So the ethanol is still gonna hurt it. So using, like, we recommend using Driven's injector defender, and then for cars that are carbureted, it's still important, carb defender. And even in my own personal cars, because I have a few cars that have aluminum engine blocks that are modern, and I put it a bottle in every other tank. It's cheap insurance. I also run, all my cars are, most of them are all direct injected. I run DI40 in them. And going back to the viscosity for the oil, someone asked that I've had multiple cars where they're calling for a 0W20 or a 0W30. And I'm like, the hell with them. And I put in the DI40, which is a 0W40. And the wear analysis, when I do used oil analysis, it shows it works. That I was mentioning earlier that I had a cast iron block direct injected Porsche engine. It's actually a Volkswagen engine in a Porsche, but for cost savings purposes. And the factory fill was a 20 weight 0W20, and I put it to a 40 weight, the DI40, and at a 5,000 mile interval, I think it had maybe 2 or 3 part per million of iron of wear. Having that extra viscosity along with the moly in there, that the wear levels were so low. But the only drawback to that, I probably lost about 5 miles to the gallon for fuel economy. So it just proves that the reason why the OEMs go thinner, it's all about fuel economy, not for wear. So yeah, so but going back to the ethanol fuels, again, the fuel dilution, the ethanol is hurting the injectors and then causing them to leak. And then that washes down the cylinder bores, and it all goes back to breakdown of lubrication. And like DI-40 is formulated so that it resists fuel dilution better than even DT-40.
Yeah.
It's just formulated different. And people ask me, why is DI-40 so much more expensive than DT-40? Well, the base stocks that go into it, it's formulated different. It's a different product.
Back to ethanol, if your customer is an E10 guy and that's all he's typically doing, but then he has a track day at the drag strip or something like that, he's going to E85, that guy will always step him up one grade in viscosity, just because we know, especially in E85, there's going to be even more dilution. And ethanol being hygroscopic, you get this moisture, you get all this moisture content that creates an acid, and just the acidic nature of the combustion byproducts with the moisture in the oil. It has a purpose, but there's a lot of trade-offs, whether it's E10 or E85. You got to be very careful, and it takes a little bit more maintenance. There's just no way around the extra maintenance. Different service intervals.
Yeah, exactly. Service intervals that we tell people, whatever the OEM's recommending for service interval, that's a normal use. None of us operate our cars in normal use. You should be following, if there's a severe service, you should be following the severe service interval. And some manufacturers don't have one. I just tell people, whatever the normal service interval is, cut it in half.
Yeah.
And you're probably safe doing that.
Okay, so that's a recommendation for anybody with a modern day aluminum engine. Is that what you're saying? That
Yeah.
you need to understand that this is the animal you're dealing with, and if you get it under control, then it won't. Are we talking about be able to push more reliability back into the engine and durability back into the engine? And along that same line, you're gunning for longevity when it comes to the product that you're using? Is that what you're putting together?
One of the things that I have really picked up on Charles over the last couple of years, I mean, his whole world is focused on Porsche. And if you walk through that wall, there's some really high dollar, really exotic, really fast cars on the other side. The first thing out his mouth always is wear protection, reliability. I mean, that's the first thing he focuses on. The performance is kind of the easy part, right?
Yeah, the performance is the easy part. It's the longevity and the reliability. It's what I tell people: oil is cheap, motors are expensive, and Porsche engines are very expensive. So the last thing you want to do is say, if I see, Mobil 1's on sale, or whatever oil you want to use at Walmart, I could get 5 quarts for $19.95. Well, how much is that engine in your car? If someone with their Boxster, their 99 Boxster, has an engine blow up and the car's worth $7,000 or $10,000, if you go to the dealership, they're going to want $40,000 for a replacement engine. So why not put the best oil you can spend, that you can buy, and change your oil more often? It's cheap insurance.
You know, and I think on your website, right? I think you stated that shelf life of an E10 fuel is about 4 weeks before it starts deteriorating and breaking down, somewhere in that neighborhood.
Yeah,
depends on climate where you buy it, because Lord knows it changes every day.
Because we see it with customers that they go to rebuild their engine. They pull the engine out of the car. With all the processes, it could take 3-4 months before the engine can go back in. We've seen people kill brand new engines because they didn't pump the gas out of the tank and put fresh gas in the tank only 4 months later. So because again, the ethanol fuels absorb moisture, they're hygroscopic. And not that I'm sure the EPA would frown at this, but I was in Missouri 2 years ago, and I was putting gas in a small town, and there was a guy with one of those pool sprayers that you suck, and you can spray water in the pool. He was using it to suck all the water off the top of the gas tank on the unleaded fuel, and he was just watering the bushes with it, because you could see the water floating in the tank, and he was just sucking all the water off the top and watering the plants with it. So that and years ago, when ethanol fuels became mainstream. I can remember seeing in the news people were getting in trouble for gas stations for taking hose and just pumping water into the gas tanks, because ethanol fuel can hold, like E10 can hold 10% by weight water. So they were putting that in there so that they could make some more money. Water is cheaper than gas.
Margin enhancement.
Margin, yeah. We don't want to give any ideas of shrinkflation. We don't want to go back there. Yeah.
Wow. So Kyle, do you, with Driven, have it on your website where if somebody wanted to look and after everything we were learning from Charles, can we get a guideline for engines and what they need to have, and even, you know, like I say, endorsing your products and realizing that what you're telling us right now, that you need to have this quality. You really need to have this quality as far as oil and changing it on a regular basis.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's a great question, Jeff, because it's kind of the premise behind really what the Joe Gibbs brand and now the Driven brand stands for. I mean, we're very much the niche of a niche player. It's one of the reasons you don't see an API starburst, you know, on the back of our bottle. This may sound a little harsh, but at this point, we just don't dumb our product down to that API level, if you will. And let's face it, our zinc, our ZDDP, our phosphorus, you know, our moly, in a lot of these scenarios. That's why we can't meet the C40 Porsche spec, or we don't blend to the C40 Porsche spec. It's because what Charles had shared with Lake about what they were seeing. And there's, you know, it's Charles finds himself in a unique position because he really has built a business around a premium brand, around a premium market.
And just like with Driven, my business is a niche and a niche. So it's the same thing.
Yeah, and it's when you're in here, you start to understand, wait a minute, he's taken Porsche, who's renowned for their engineering, and saying, okay, we've identified a problem, what's the solution? And in this particular scenario we're talking about today, the solutions are lubrication and fuel quality. And so between our, you know, our XP line, our DT, our DI line, our GP1 line, and then our Defender products on the fuel side, we've got solutions, whether it's in a race car, you know, a dual purpose car, or, you know, a daily driver. Really, we have solutions that cover all three of those uses.
I see there's a question from Justin on there about increasing the volume on the oil pump, or rather than doing a higher viscosity oil. And we all know that pressure is just resistance to flow. And yeah, as far as bearing clearances are concerned, a larger oil pump is going to increase overall system pressure. But with aluminum cylinder bores and like camshaft and lifter surfaces, viscosity of the oil, ultimately the value I look at is high temp, high shear viscosity for an oil. That is what dictates the strength of that film. So it doesn't matter if you have a bigger oil pump in there and you have more system pressure. The viscosity of the oil, when you have that metal to metal contact, that's ultimately between the additives and the viscosity and that oil film strength. That's what's providing your wear protection.
So I see
and I'm going to say, I'm glad you brought that up, because everybody seems to think that when you know, I mean, let's be realistic. There's quality oil and there's oil. I mean, there's a lot of oil out there that you can put in an engine that will give it some lubrication. But there's other oil you can put in there that will give it lubrication plus protection when it gets heated and starts to break down. I mean, that's the reason why, at least from my experience, you know, you want that film, you want that protection, that whenever an engine is being stressed or whatever, it won't just all of a sudden swipe a bearing, or you know, you wind up scuffing something that starts, it's almost like a cancer inside an engine. It starts breaking down. And when you put cheap, I mean, I hate using the term this, but if you put cheap oil in there, even if it's new oil, it's not going to help it any, because it's not lubricating. It's not protecting that surface that you're talking about. And here again, we got Lake, you know, making sure that we're doing a good job. But, can you elaborate on the differences between the surface finishes of iron liners? And I'm gonna probably butcher both of these bores, but Austell, and a Nakasal bores,
So, I'll explain. So,
Okay.
you have Alusil, and most people won't know what Alusil is. But if I tell you
I
what
ain't got a clue.
So Alusil, the first engine that used an Alusil engine block was the Chevy Vega. And everybody knows what a Chevy Vega was and all the problems that engine had. Obviously, the technology was new then. It's gotten much better. Lubrication, with lubrication, I really do honestly believe we can prevent some of these problems in these modern engines with the right oil. But as far as surface finishes, if you look at a Alusil or a Locasil, and Locasil, I'll just dumb it down. I call Locasil localized Alusil. So Alusil, the whole block is cast out of a high silicon content aluminum, where with Locasil, they actually, when they're high pressure die casting the engine block, they put a freeze cast insert that has silicon particles suspended in a resin matrix. And when they when they push that aluminum, the molten aluminum into the die, it burns the resin off and leaves the silicon particles at the surface of the bore. And I actually have a visual of this. This is from an engine that failed. This bore is cracked, so it's a nice example. But I think hopefully you guys can see at home, there's actually a difference. Let's see that side. You can see there's a color difference. So the silicon, the darker gray is where all the silicon particles are, and the rest is regular aluminum. And you can actually see, I think I can put that up. You can see there is zero crosshatch on that bore. It's like a mirror, it's smooth. With Alusil and Locasil, you have no crosshatch. It's those silicon particles exposed on the surface with oil around them that support the whole system. Where with an iron bore or with Nicosil, they have totally different surface finishes, but the idea is still the same. You have your valleys and your peaks, and the oil sits in those valleys, and as a piston ring slides over, that's providing that oil film for the parts. So you have you hone the bores and the honing, and they're both plateau honed. Nicosil's plateau honed like ideally you would hone an iron block. Not everyone plateau hones a block, but ideally, that totally different surface finishes. And now honing in, oh, that's a bad pun, between an iron block and a Nicosil, the surface finishes on Nicosil are much smoother. That sometimes you can't really see the crosshatch on a Nicosil bore. It's almost like a mirror. You have to get at the right angle. And then the angle of the crosshatch is also different. Typically with Nicosil, we have like a 10 degree or 15 degree crosshatch, where with cast iron, typically you have a 45 degree crosshatch. And the crosshatch actually controls, it's a parameter you can control for ring rotation. So the shallower the angle, the slower the piston ring rotates. So with Nicosil, you want a really shallow crosshatch angle. And also with Nicosil, you can't have so there's different values. There's RPK, RK, RVK. Those are the values that tell you the surface finish of the cylinder bore as we measure them. With Nicosil, you can't really have a high RPK value because Nicosil is made up of nickel, silicon, and carbide. So if that surface is rough and has high peaks, that's a file. That's almost a diamond file. And what is it going to do to your piston rings? If it's honed incorrectly and it's too rough, those rings are worn out in a few hundred miles. They look like, if you look at them under a microscope, they look like they have hundreds of thousands of miles. So you have to start with relatively smooth finish. And I would probably say if you use an RA value, which is oversimplifying things, usually these bores come in on Nicosil somewhere, I would say an average of an RA of 6, which is very, very smooth.
And before Lake says it, I'm just going to throw out the word profilometer.
Profilometer, yes. And I would bring our profilometer is in our lab and it's currently being used, so I can't bring it up. And I think it'd be kind of hard to show how it uses. But for those who don't know what a profilometer is, basically think about it as a record player. and it's hooked up to your computer. And when it drags, it has a little stylus and it drags it across the cylinder bore. And then it'll give you a graph of what that surface looks like. And it'll measure those values, the RA, RPK, RVK, RK. And if you contact Total Seal and you buy rings from Total Seal, they'll give you guidelines for your iron block, what the ideal surface finish needs to be. And if you don't know how to get there, they'll sell you a profilometer and tell you how to get there. Surface finish is very important. It's often overlooked with engines. People you think, oh, as long as the bore is round and straight, it'll work. Well, difference between working and optimizing it are two totally different things. It's like, I'll use one of Lake's example with used oil analysis. It's like people say, well, XYZ oil works great for me. They don't do used oil analysis. How do you know? All you know is the engine's running or it's blown up. You don't know whether it's an A or an F, unless what you don't know. So there's great tools, whether it's for an engine assembler or someone preparing a block, a profilometer. A lot of people don't own one. They should own one if you're working on engines. And even if you're not honing your own blocks, you should have a profilometer anyways, so you can double check what someone else did. My father-in-law told me years ago, if you remove the you and me out of assume, all you're left with is an ass. So trust but verify. And having these tools are very good. And if you don't know what they are or how to use them or what it means, we have some of that information on our website. But Total Seal, we rely heavily on Total Seal for our piston rings that we run in our Porsche applications, because we can get down to the nitty gritty if we probably don't have the time, but light checking rings, making sure they're light tight. That's one of the things they can do for us. Another thing is dialing in tensions with oil controls. With Nicosil bores, you have to run low tension rings, but if you run too low, the engines burn oil. So so we can play around within a pound or two, and we can dial in for an application for a customer the exact amount of ring tension to have the characteristics that they're looking for, a balance between oil consumption and performance, et cetera.
Jeff, you were teeing us up for a great question there earlier on the shear stability of lubricants, and some of what Charles said kind of reminded me of where we might be going on that. Some of the race cars on the other side of the wall, they'll run our XP9, which is a 1040 full synthetic, but shear stability by design on that it's going to be fantastic for 2 weekends of racing, depending on how hard you run the car. Some racers we'd say every weekend, some we'd say 2 weekends. Just depends how you use the car. But how we come to, and then we have others like Charles mentioned, where he's going 5,000 miles. But when Charles says 5,000 miles on a service interval, he knows what the finish line looks like that. And that's through testing with Speed Diagnostics, I think, is one of your favorite tools for determining kind of these service intervals.
And doing regular analysis, so you have trend data, because then you know, like if you're building an engine, you do it first oil change. It's going to look like crap because it's a fresh engine, but that gives you a baseline of what the worst that engine ever should be. And data should trend down on wear. And when you see it start trending up, you have to ask yourself, what's wrong? They'll have a fuel dilution issue that's washing down the bores, or high fuel content in the oil. It gives you, before you actually blow up, it lets you say, hey, something's going on. I should stop running the engine until I figure that out. And again, using the right oil and doing the oil testing so you know the oil is working for that application is paramount.
If I could throw on another thought on that, we're actually using Speed Diagnostics to optimize oil viscosity in some of these drag race applications, where, and we're doing exactly what Charles said. Once you establish a baseline, then we might go, if we're running a 0-20, we might do a 50-50 blend of a 0-10 and a 0-20, knock it down somewhere in the neighborhood of a 0-15. If wear metals don't pick up, we know we're okay at that lighter viscosity, but that way we can stair step it to where, you know, your engine might be optimal at a 0-18 and Charles may be getting away with a 0-12 just because of the unique characteristics of your particular engine, even though they may be the same basic combination. But that reminds me of something else Lake always told us: motor before the molecule, right?
Yep.
two good oils, but for whatever reason, your particular motor engine wanted or was able to get by it with a little bit lighter viscosity, and how we can determine that is through testing.
Well, gentlemen, you have hopefully opened a lot of eyes today and got them thinking about, the engine is just like a human being. It needs checkups. You got to pay attention to the vital signs. And if you get the vital signs right, you get what? You get a longer life. And that's what it's all about, and performance. So thank you very much for your insight and for producing a great product. And like I say, educating us. And I'm sure that we can go to your websites and continue to learn more.
Absolutely.
Yep. Thank you for having us.
Thank you. Absolutely.
Thank you very much, Charles and Kyle. Thank you for being with us today. This webinar has been recorded. It will be posted later on the EPARTRADE platform, distributed through our newsletters and social media channels. We will be back next Wednesday for the last two episodes. Actually, we have two more, Race Industry Now sessions before the end of the season. It's unbelievable. We have been pretty much live every week since the beginning of the year. So we have two more sessions next week with HMS on safety, and the week after on counterfeit. Then we'll take a few weeks off to get ready for Race Industry Week. And you're going to be seeing very soon some big announcement coming for speakers. So thank you very much for being with us today. We'll be live. And in the meantime, we push Driven's product back on the homepage of the EPARTRADE platform, as well as Speed Diagnostic. Thank you very much, and have a great week. Bye-bye.
Thank you, everybody.
Yep.
Take care.
Registering on EPARTRADE is easy. To start, click on the Join for Free button on the homepage. First, search your company to see if it's already in our database. If you see your company on the list, click on it to select it. Then, choose Claim Company if you are one of the decision makers, an owner, marketing person, or main company contact. Or choose Join Company if you are an employee, and press Continue. If you couldn't find your company in our database, select Register a New Company. On the following page, fill out your name, email, phone number, job title, and choose a secure password. If you chose Register a New Company, you'll need to choose your business type. Select Supplier if you're looking to display products or services and connect with buyers. Choose Racing Business if you're looking to source new parts and connect with suppliers. Choose Race Team if you own or are a member of a professional race team. Then, enter your company name. Please provide a website, Facebook page, or LinkedIn if you have one, and choose to either claim or join the company. You can view and agree to our terms of use here. If you'd like to receive our weekly newsletter, choose Accept. Finally, click Register Now and your registration will be submitted for approval. An email will be sent to your inbox. Please confirm your email address and you will be approved shortly. Welcome to EPARTRADE.